Welcome back to Dogs and Gooses, where the dogs are dirty and the gooses are silly.
You'd best believe.
All right, everybody, we have got a special treat for you guys today. It has been a hot minute since we recorded.
A couple weeks.
Couple 3 weeks. I hope you guys were eating.
Yeah, we joke about that, but it's been so long that
yeah, if you
could
didn't,
have
you're
perished.
probably not still with us. But no, actually, welcome back, everybody. Williams and I have been quite busy with the holidays and with work and all of the above. So we are back, and today we are here to discuss the Roman Empire and its fall.
Because everyone's talking about it.
It's true. It's been quite a popular topic lately.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I just wanted to take a minute and discuss. So, we are going through a bit of a growth period as a podcast.
You don't think that we haven't thought about y'all at all?
Yeah.
During this hiatus that we've taken.
I thought about you at least one time for like 3 or 4 seconds. So, don't think you haven't been on my mind. So what we want to do is we're going to remaster some of our old episodes. We've learned some things about sound quality. They probably still won't be as high quality as some of our newer episodes, hopefully will be. But we're going to remaster some of them, try and make it a little easier on the ears, that sort of thing. Second, we are going to kind of revamp the podcast a little bit. We want to get a little more specific with some of our topics, kind of go back to a little bit more of the root ideas that we had as we've been kind of figuring things out and the way that we want them to run. Is there any other big changes we're making, Williams? Anything you can think of?
Not at the moment. Nothing immediately comes to mind, but just know that we're working on stuff. And we're constantly thinking about new ways to improve and be better.
Mm-hmm.
We may not listen we may not care if you listen, but we kind of do a little, maybe.
No, we don't care if they listen, but if they do listen, we want it to be a good experience.
You best believe. You had best believe.
So, back to our topic, the fall of Rome. Disclaimer here. I don't think either of us are history majors. Both of us have taken history classes, but neither of us are history majors, and neither of us are. Well, Williams might be considered a scholar with his philosophy degree. I don't know exactly at what point you're considered a scholar.
I've read some history material on the old on a variety of topics, but a bit on the Roman Empire fairly recently, actually.
So Williams is probably going to be a better source than me in this case.
I don't know. We'll see.
But I did a little bit of research over the past couple of days. And honestly, we will probably be revisiting this topic again later with more information. We'll see. We'll see how many of you guys love it. If we only get about half the world's population to love it, then maybe not.
Yeah.
But if it's the whole world's population, then we'll consider it. So, Williams, do you know where the Roman Empire spanned? Like the area of it? If you don't, that's okay. I Googled it.
It grew and then shrank.
It did. It did.
So, at one point, I wanted to say, I think they took over what is now today Britain.
Mm-hmm. They did get that far,
at one point. Although, I think they kind of petered out. I don't know if they lost it before. But I know it was obviously into Italy, as that's where Rome was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know the entire span, but
no, that's okay. So according to let's see here. Ancient Rome Facts, Location, and Timeline, which is at www.history.com. It says Ancient Rome grew from a small town on central Italy's Tiber River. Is it Tiber? I think it's Tiber.
I believe it's Tiber.
Into an empire that at its peak encompassed most of continental Britain, much of Western Asia, Northern Africa, and the Mediterranean islands. So they had a pretty dang large surface area. And as I was reading about it, it seems like kind of what happened is they spread out really far and they had that whole area. And eventually, because of infighting, they split. And then after they split, they lost a lot of their centralized power.
Part of it, I think, was infighting, but also part of the split was just sake of convenience. So they had the expansionist policy where they're when we expand, it's fantastic. We're gaining new land.
Uh-huh.
It's really enriching our nation.
Mm-hmm.
But after a certain point, it gets really difficult to be able to manage how much land you're taking in. And after a certain point, it's not as valuable.
Mm.
Sometimes the cost of war is high, and you get when you're stretched out that thin, it becomes harder to be able to wage the war to get the piece of
Mm-hmm.
land.
Yeah, which I think is true. I think any successful organization at a certain scale it requires really, really good organization. And that's something that people struggle with. I feel like so I can't speak specifically toward the historical events and how Rome was organized because maybe they were really well organized, and I'm sure they were to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But the bigger the organization, the more organizational um, prowess is required to maintain a good and healthy communication system and I'm trying to think of a word, but it's not coming to me. A good and healthy implementation system, implementation of policies, problem solving, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I can't speak to whether Rome's organization was good or what, and I think you're right. That was a big reason for why they split. But like for example, in business, um, most businesses that are successful because the people at the very bottom can see the vision of the people at the very top.
Correct. I think there became kind of a disparity in terms of that. I've been so most of the what I've read on Rome came from this book that I got here. It's called The Collapse of Complex Societies.
Uh huh.
It's by a guy named Joseph A. Tainter. I don't know if it's a real popular read or whatever. I found it at a
It looks
library book
scholarly.
sale years ago, and I've been reading it and I enjoy it. And he talks about many different civilizations, and Rome is one. But he uh, he goes into that. I think he takes a different approach than a lot of people.
Uh huh.
And I don't think other approaches are wrong, but he's trying to put forth his idea that the collapse of societies in general kind of come from the idea that the the more complexity increases for a while, the returns are fantastic on
Uh huh.
complexity.
Uh huh.
Like as a society becomes more complex, more dynamic, you get all these benefits. But at a certain point, you keep going with the complexity, and things just keep getting more and more complex, and the returns kind of fall off.
Uh huh.
We don't get as much for
So you're
the effort
saying
we're putting
once
in.
the society gets so big, it requires so many working parts to govern and operate efficiently that eventually it causes the eventual fall.
I think that's a part of it. He also takes a bit more of an economical approach as well. So he mentions the changing prices for things
Uh huh.
and uh, how over time the uh, Roman uh, the the different emperors would implement uh, new strategies to change the cost. It can almost like what we're seeing now
Uh huh.
with inflation and things. And so they knew that in order to effectively stabilize the economy as best they could, they went and did things to increase taxes, which
Mm-hmm.
we see now, and also to change the prices and inflate things, which we're also seeing.
Mm.
And uh, it's intriguing to see. There was a one of the emperors, or maybe there were two or three of them who did this throughout the empire, the empire's history, but they would create a book full of prices for different things.
Oh.
And they would use that to say, hey, kind of a reset. This is the price of everything. However, there were so many flaws in that.
Uh huh.
And the prices of certain things they overestimated, some they
Some they underestimated.
underestimated.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of
And that affects
destroyed the
supply and
economy
demand.
further. Yeah.
That's what. Well, the so I recently took a marketing class, and they talked about how like because we live in a free market economy,
Mm-hmm.
and you know me, I'm very big on the free market.
I appreciate the free market as well.
Yeah, exactly. But in my class, they talked about the dangers of specifying prices because those that are profitable are going to garner more people. More people are going to be
Mm-hmm.
drawn to them. And then when people are drawn to them, eventually it's going to be oversaturated. and then people are going to sell less, and then they go out of business, and it creates all sorts of false demands and false supplies, which really messes with the economic system and really requires a lot of personal touches. Not to mention when you get into corruption, like people that have a friend in the wool industry, and so they convince their friend to charge or to raise the price as a politician,
Exactly.
and so on and so on. So there's a whole bunch of like moving parts to that, like you said. Um,
Something that really struck me was that things had gotten so bad that a lot of times the people in the empire, towards the end of the empire, at least the western side, because that's he focuses on the Western Roman Empire, which fell before the Eastern. A lot of people looked to the barbarians almost as kind of saviors from Rome. Because at the beginning, you hear a lot about how the people just loved Rome, how they were citizens of Rome first, and then whatever else they were.
Yeah.
And towards the end, that just wasn't the case. They lost that special allegiance.
Well, I was studying up on it, and there were some interesting things. One that I read was it talked about basically how initially for Rome there was a way for even the lowest of peasants to communicate with the literal emperors. They had systems for that to get through. And then one particular emperor, I can't remember his name, did away with it, and they never replaced that with any sort of other system that allowed the bottom class to communicate with the top class, which also created kind of an echo chamber for the elites.
Yep.
So like if things were going well for the elites, then they would be like, this is great. And they would not be aware when things were not going well for the middle to low class of people, because there was no communication between the two groups. And this also affected policy and probably eventually led to, in part, the spiral of Rome. I've been reading up on this, and there's a bunch of different like theories as to what caused the eventual spiral and the eventual full downfall. But it seems like that is at least one as a separating of the upper class and the lower class, in terms of they didn't really rub shoulders anymore. There was very little communication between the two, particularly between the lower class of people and the emperor, which would also lead to that what you're talking about, where they're like, well, this country's never done anything for me. Like they don't feel like their needs are met. They don't feel like they're part of the country anymore. It's more of like and this same one talked about, I'll see if I can find it in a minute while you're speaking, but this same section talked about how at that same time period they changed from a philosophy of how the emperor is the first among equals to a philosophy of referring to them as Lord or God.
Oh yeah, they had a kind of a complex where they would they consider them like descendants of gods and kind of gods themselves, which was kind of intriguing.
Yeah, it's really intriguing. So,
which I mean, I understand, and I think that as a society is in decline, you want to probably emphasize the rule of the leader. I think that's an effective method. And for the Romans, like this talked about, as they conquered new places, during the period in which, because eventually they took on Catholicism as the state religion. But prior to that, they had a whole pantheon of gods.
Yeah.
And as they conquered a new nation, they just kind of took the gods of that region and just kind of like meshed it into theirs. And so that was kind of an effective way to bring the two different cultures together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'll also mention that things got so bad for the people, like it talks about here in this book, that they started to allot land to different people to try and they needed more production of agriculture, and so they'd allot land to people, and they would tax the land pretty ruthlessly, towards the end. And then if you couldn't pay, well, it was going to be on your town. It kind of, whether or not you're able to do it is completely irrelevant. You're going to pay the price of the taxation, no matter whether this was a good season or a bad season.
Yeah.
It talks about how in times of famine, the farmers were the first ones to go and move to the city, because they just could not keep the food in their mouths.
Really?
A lot of times they had no choice to really eat live off their food supply. They just had to give it as taxes or whatever, and then they started to try and band together under a single landowner. Just work underneath them to try and make ends meet, and that was a little better for them. But the government didn't like that because it hurt their tax revenue. But it was a whole thing. It got really messy.
I believe it. Really quick, we'll continue that whole vein. I did want to discuss just a couple of like timepieces and stuff like that.
Or you just want to talk about the empire in general during its heyday?
Yeah, well, I just want to briefly, before we really dig into the meat of the collapse. I don't know that I even have a prevailing theory, but we'll discuss a couple of the more popular ones, and then if anyone else out there feels like they're an expert, I would love to hear their thoughts as well.
I think there's one right.
No, it seems like there was
answer.
There was one gentleman who wrote a book that I was reading about earlier, and he put forward 217 possible causes for the collapse. And the reality is it's probably a mix of those. It seems like there are a few that were a little bit more accepted than others, but there are still plenty of options. So, really quick, as far as when it was founded, I did not see a super clear and concise.
Right, I mean, when does a country become a country?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't see a super clear and concise beginning. Just a moment, I'm looking this up here. Oh, I lost it. But it was roughly 600 BC to 476 AD. The fall itself was pretty agreed upon. Like there was not a whole lot of debate as to when the fall was, but the beginning spanned from about 600 BC to 7 something BC. So it was roughly about 1,000-year span. Oh, sorry, that's Siri talking to us.
She is not a guest.
Yeah, not a guest. We're not
not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor. So the fall of Rome was completed. This is according to www.britannica.com, and it says it was completed in 476 when the German chieftain Odoacer, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's Odoacer, deposed the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus. The East, always richer and stronger, continued as the Byzantine Empire through the European Middle Ages. So that's pretty solid as the ending, the official fall of the Roman Empire, the West
pretty
side
clean
of the Roman
cut.
Empire.
The last emperor gets taken out.
Yeah, that's pretty much like you can't really argue about that. The East side continued on for some time, but it was pretty clear at that point that the Roman Empire no longer had the power that it had once held. It actually, the split, it was all one empire until 276 AD. And after that, that was when it split into two separate emperors that sometimes got along, but other times were actively at war.
I understand the strategy. I think is a decent one, just because it's a lot of land to cover, and as the empire's kind of falling apart, you don't have all the resources to spread it all across, and it's so big, you got so many different issues going on.
Yeah, and if they had been able to maintain civil relations between the two, I imagine they probably would have done pretty well.
Right, I think it just deteriorated over time. I think they started out probably on
pretty civil, probably. So yeah, so those are the main kind of facts we wanted to talk about. We talked about how big it was earlier. It's huge for its day.
Good old Romulus and Remus.
Yeah.
Starting the empire. I think, if I remember right, the story goes that their mother was a human, their dad was Ares. Mars. Yeah, because that's
the Roman
god of war.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, they were raised by a she-wolf. That's why they got that statue of them, getting the milk from the coyote. Or wolf or whatever it was.
Well, I hope it was a wolf. They were raised by a she-wolf.
Yeah.
But,
whatever it is.
I actually don't know if I know that story, but that's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of the story there.
Well,
Romulus
now
and
I know
Remus
it.
founded Rome. Twin brothers.
The original descendants from a dirty dog, the she-wolf.
Oh yes.
Williams comes from that line as well. I don't know how I know that, but I just do.
I have a very Roman-esque
Yeah,
presence.
yeah. He constantly pulls up to my place in his chariot.
Yeah, got my shield and spear. You know.
And the like.
Yep.
So, with that, we were talking kind of about the split, the Civil War. It seems like the fall of the Western Roman Empire actually happened when there was one emperor on the west side, and he basically sailed over to go to war with the east side, and he burned his boats and his supplies.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. And it was basically his way of saying, we're not going back. We're here to conquer. We're going to win or we're going to die. At which point, the farmers on the east side also burned their crops. And he had nothing.
I appreciated the kind of dedication that must have taken, you know.
Yeah.
However, you know, we on our mission, a popular thing was be bold but not overbearing.
Yeah.
He was bold, and I think he went into the overbearing.
Probably. It's the sound of it to me.
So, yeah. So be bold, just not that bold.
Maybe next time burn your boats, but not your supplies.
Yeah, take the supplies. It's going to take a little longer. But it'll be worth having the supplies.
You're going to have some Roman soldiers carry supplies. They're going to grumble a little bit, but they won't be starving.
Yeah. Their bellies won't be grumbling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he was forced to retreat, and then was eventually killed in a battle.
He had no boats.
Well, he had to make a land retreat over hostile territory, and then was killed in a battle, and pretty much it was all downhill from there. I think they did get an emperor back, but pretty much their army was scattered. There's just a few like people left to take on who you were talking about, the kind of the.
Well, they had I supposedly I forget which border it was. That was the one where they got a lot of the enemies coming through, but theirs was at least twice as big as the Eastern Empire.
Yeah. Well, the Eastern Empire also. So during this time, when they had the Western Empire moving over to attack them, the Eastern Empire sent a message to the Germanic people, and they said, basically, hey, you guys should go attack their flank. And so they did. They went and attacked them from behind while they were attacking this other side.
That's a little rude.
A little uncalled for, I would say.
You know, I know the Geneva Convention wasn't in place,
but
there's got to be something in there about it.
Well, I don't think there is even still about having an ally attack an enemy, but you know, it's kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's supposed to be a
civil dispute. You know? Keep it in the family.
Yeah, only our people. It's like if we were having our civil war and Great Britain came over and picked a side. Ridiculous.
I think they tried.
They actually did.
They just
they
weren't as committed.
I think they more tried to. Didn't they try at that point to kind of take it back? Like they were like, hey, like they're kind of weakened. Let's go give it a shot. Or am I just confused? Did they just pick a side?
I think they more picked this. I think they wanted to do stuff.
I know there was outside funding for like a couple like.
Yeah. I don't know how much there was. I don't know how much it affected anything because
from what I understand, it played a small role. A lot of the outside funding did.
Mm-hmm. But how far can that really go when you really needed supplies?
Yeah. The real question here with the fall of the Roman Empire, Williams, is as we start our empire, the Dogs and Gooses Empire. We're fully I don't know, like what, 6 months into this now, into our empire.
Romulus, Remus over here.
Yeah. The wolf, that's Williams. The goose, that's in there too. That's another story. Don't look it up. It's there. And we're starting our empire. We're about 6 months in. I'd say we've got at least 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we learn from them on what not to do? Perhaps not to burn our boats.
When we go over to attack, we're not burning the boats with all the supplies. I mean, maybe burn the boats, but not the supplies.
Yeah, it would look pretty cool to burn the boats. But if the supplies are in there, Williams, did you remember to grab all the hot dogs out of there, or did you just leave them in there?
Starks, I will have removed all the hot dogs. So we brought for our
Good
supplies.
man. What about the pizza?
That may not make it.
Williams? Just because it has gluten doesn't mean you can just leave it in the boat.
But I can. No, I will say that despite the fall, it had a good run.
It did. It absolutely did.
can't emphasize. They had some great emperors in there. There were a lot of bad ones, but I mean that's just how it is when you have a monarchy sort of situation. There was a period where they said these were like the best of the Roman emperors, and they had a really good section. But do you know what? Why that section was so good?
Why?
Because none of the emperors following the emperor was their son.
Oh, interesting. So
So
how
a
did
lot
they
of
select
them-
the new emperor?
A lot of it was through adoption.
Really?
So they, for example, Marcus Aurelius was in that line. He's considered like the last great emperor, if I remember correctly, of the Roman Empire. And his, I don't remember the exact connection, but so his father passed away kind of earlier on, and he was adopted not by the sitting emperor, if I remember correctly, but by the advisor of the emperor. Because the emperor's like, I want you to adopt him, because he saw that the writing on the wall that he was going to die soon, and he was going to die before Marcus was able to really mature. And Marcus was, from a very young age, a very thoughtful individual, very well respected around, a student of philosophy and Stoics and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's a lot of potential in this kid. I want that kid to be the emperor. And honestly, hats off to the guy who came right after him, because it would have been so easy
to just remain the emperor.
Right, and you even like, oh, I want my son to be the emperor, and then just kill Marcus.
Yeah.
It's not that unheard of.
Yeah.
But instead, he was very much supportive of Marcus and trained him up during the period when he himself was the emperor.
Wow.
But then you look at Marcus himself. He was, I think this is a mark of a great emperor, but he didn't necessarily want the power all to himself. And so he appoints as a co-emperor his brother, who's the son of the
I read about
his
those
adopted
too.
brother.
Yeah.
And until his adopted brother died. I just think there are a lot of admirable things about him, but it was that 100%. Sort of thing where they would adopt this person,
adopt people in,
right,
and follow that line that way.
That's and honestly, even Marcus, his children, I think he was raising them up to be pretty good leaders. However, the ones that he wanted to probably succeed him, all died.
Really?
And so I think, if I remember correctly, he only had one son left or whatever, and that's the one who became emperor and was honestly horrible. So I think that was kind of out of his hands.
That is interesting. I read,
but a lot of them just didn't have children or sons, I should say.
Well, as I read about this, I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, that's why the king, like emperor type system, is so fickle, because it's so dependent on one person, and these people aren't always selected. It's not like, and that whole kind of thought process used to work, I think, back in the day, when there was this whole like destined to rule, like chosen by God type of thing for kings and emperors.
That's kind of how it was in Rome. They were talking about, they were like gods.
Exactly. And so I think that sort of thing basically says like these kings are actually better than you, and you should trust them, even though that's not actually the case. So to me, I think it shows to me how much I appreciate our system, and I think that was the problem they were trying to solve with the three branches of government, which Great Britain also already kind of addressed by creating a parliament, which held the majority of the power. Well, they held a lot of power back then, and they hold pretty much all the power, and the king and
they're just figureheads.
Royal families, just figureheads. Yeah.
I will say, I think there's a benefit to monarchy if you in some
Well,
aspects
I think
because
if you have a
there's
good,
no term things.
yes,
If you have a good one,
I think
they're
if you have
there
a
for their whole
good
lifetime.
king or queen, then they will lead a life and country and prosperity for their entire lifetime.
And
But I
that's an
think,
extended period.
yeah,
Like you
yeah,
can do stuff in
that's a
that period.
good amount of time. And so sometimes even good kings and queens will be followed by good kings and queens. And so you can have 2 lifetimes of prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
I think, however, though, that it is tough to get a very consistent, like, good rule.
Yeah, just through lineage alone,
Yeah, it's really hard to do.
there's no guarantees.
And so I think that really reduces the longevity of a civilization.
Mm-hmm.
The other hard part is, though, with the other systems, you run into the same sort of issues. Like for us, we change a president every 4 years.
And they're not
And
able to do a ton in
yeah,
4 years. I mean, you're able to do some stuff, or at least
uh-huh.
initiate things, but if the next president doesn't necessarily hold your views or whatever, then a lot of that progress is lost.
And when as a society we mostly agree on things, then that's not a huge deal. But increasingly, we're becoming more and more polarized in our opinions on what we should do and what we shouldn't do, and so on and so on.
Right.
And as that polarization takes place, it means that the country every 4 years takes these huge swings, basically back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's drawbacks to either side, obviously. But yeah, so it is interesting to me the lack of consistency over long periods of time, but more consistency over like shorter in terms of like a lifetime shorter, not like 500 years.
Right. I will say that great things happened under. I'm going to say the term good.
Uh-huh.
No one's wholly good,
Yeah.
and in some respects, a person is good. In some respects, the person is horrible. But
Yeah.
I mean, you think of there were many great kings and emperors and rulers throughout history. Like Peter the Great, I don't think he did everything great. He wasn't the best, tallest people, maybe, and
Uh-huh.
things. However, he founded St. Petersburg, which was for Russia the most modern, westernized city ever. And
Uh-huh.
it was kind of like a beacon.
Yeah.
And it was kind of been a pride and a joy historically of Russia since its creation. And just things like that you don't always
kind of consider.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are great people in every society and in every situation. It's just, how many of them will rise to the top and make a huge difference? How many of them make small differences that might even might even kind of compound and make a big difference as a whole, but you won't know their name type of thing. And I think there are many people like that everywhere. Really quick, I want to change gears a little bit. There's a couple of leading kind of prevailing theories as to why Rome fell. And I would be curious to hear from you, Sir Williams, what your number one is. And I'm sure we're going to miss a few. Like I said, I've just put in a study into this for the last couple of days, and I'm honestly a little limited on my sources, but I'm going to cover everything that I think that I've heard. So we've talked about like kind of the deterioration at the top of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the most influential thing, because that would be, in my view, the root of the problem, or perhaps at least the trunk of the problem, because if you would like, you could maybe go underneath political decay and go societal decay, because if the people support corrupt politicians, then the corrupt politicians kind of bring about more issues, and so on and so on. But to me, I think social and political decay would probably be the number one, like, reasons I think that Rome fell. In terms of social decay, I think that they had, to your point, like they had a kind of an established value system, and when other religions came into it, they just kind of ate those religions.
Right. I mean, I don't think they destroyed those religions.
No,
but
they like kind of incorporated them in there. Yeah, and I think that worked, except Christianity is a totally different brand of religion than all the other ones. It's a little harder to eat that one and incorporate it into yours.
But I think by that time, let's see, it was Constantine who adopted Catholicism as the official religion of the state.
Wasn't that like 300 AD?
Let me look real fast. I think I pulled it up. That was Constantine was from 280 to 337 AD.
Okay.
So I mean, that's kind of towards the end, right? You said they collapsed in
At
427.
426, I think, or
Okay.
four. Is it? Wait, let me check. It might have been 476.
So kind of towards
It's
the end,
four
anyway.
seventy six.
I'm pretty sure by that time they were
Yeah,
kind
because
of at the end of their
one
expansion.
of the people I read put forth Christianity as a cause of its downfall as part. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but also I'm a little bit invested in like
The
Christianity,
idea.
so I'm
Hmm.
like, so I was like, is that just me being a little bit personal? Because it is a different value system, and also Christianity has taken different forms in a sense. Not really like, I mean, it's all Christian, but some different branches of Christianity that are obviously different from our own at times have been a little bit more, because like there were the Crusades and like all that different stuff.
Right.
There were some violent and parts of Christianity that I would argue don't really follow actual pure Christianity.
Hmm. I think it's a complex idea.
Uh huh.
I think unless I think that a society that adopts a one religion can kind of work. I mean, you look at a lot of the Islamic nations, and
Mm-hmm.
those are surviving. However,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a fantastic way to do things
I think
unless it's a small group and they're all just really invested in the religion and they're friendly towards those who don't
towards other
necessarily share
religions.
those ideas.
I agree. And so my point was this: is I
Otherwise,
brought
I
up
don't
that
think you should have an official one
some
for the state.
people some people believed, or some of the one of the theories that was brought forth is that Christianity caused part of that fall. Um, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it would be more due to the fact that people stopped seeing themselves first as Romans. Because you basically had a group of people that were very proud, as I understand it,
Hmm.
to be part of Rome in the early years of the empire, because it honestly like looked after its subjects well enough. Like when new people came in, they talked about this. So they used to do when new groups of people would come in, be they immigrants or people they conquered, they would very carefully manage them. They would split them up, and then they would put them in different areas and give them specific responsibilities. And so these people would soon become integrated into the overall culture of Rome
Hmm.
because they associated largely with Romans and not so much with people of their own, like previous
They weren't able
immigration.
to kind of become cliques
Yes, exactly.
within the empire.
Exactly. And they talked about how in the end of the empire, they kind of stopped doing that. And I
Well,
think
they
it's just because
also
they didn't
stopped
have
conquering as many people too,
it,
so that might have.
exactly.
But that's an intriguing idea.
Well, I think it largely, like I said, comes from a lack of continuity or of group identity of the Romans. I really think that's a big part of it because back in the day, like we talked about, they felt connected from the lowest Roman to the highest emperor. Like they felt like they could bring a problem forward and it could either get solved or at least addressed in some manner. And
And there
as
was
that
some benefit to
changed,
being a Roman citizen.
exactly, exactly,
And I think that got completely. No one really saw that at the end of the empire. They saw it
yes,
more as like in this book, all those farmers and things. It was a burden to be a citizen.
yes, absolutely,
And I think when you have a good society, you feel that's benefiting you in a lot of ways.
uh
Not
huh,
necessarily that they're just handing you everything, but they're providing good opportunities. They're
absolutely,
not taking half your wages
yeah,
for whatever. They're protecting, they keep society safe from outside forces
yeah,
that might try and harm the established order within society, but not too much stifling order.
yeah, exactly. Well, and I read, so as I was studying, I studied about that in the early days of, or I don't know if early days is the correct term because it probably lasted for the better part of it, so
Hmm.
like hundreds of years. But it talked about how early on the soldiers were paid by the government, actual like money,
Yep.
and this made it so that when they went out and they were guarding like these rural communities and they went to buy things, it brought in a lot of goods, and so the soldiers were
Benefited the
welcome. They were well
economy.
disciplined. It benefited the economy, and it didn't cause that many issues. And so the people saw them more as protectors than they saw them um
They weren't as
as
rowdy and
yeah, they were more seen as protectors, and like valiant parts of the empire, then they were seen as detriments to the
Mm-hmm.
area. But as time went on, eventually they stopped paying the soldiers, and instead they gave them land and told them to farm it. And so these soldiers were
Yep.
then members of the community, and they were in the area, and they spent less time being soldiers, and then kind of the chain of command broke down a little bit, which eventually led to soldiers being seen more as detriments to the area than they were seen as protectors and people who brought good things to the area, which obviously is going to reduce a lot of the local support for soldiers and reduce the quality of soldiers, even if the soldiers were good, honest people and didn't create overall detriments, they were not as trained in the art of soldiering, obviously.
Right. And well, even to that, it talks about how towards the end it was harder to find more soldiers, and they had to maintain a certain army to keep everyone safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the emperors instituted a policy where if your father was a soldier, you were going to be a soldier.
Oh,
And so
really?
it kind of became,
That's
and
kind of
then
a
this, he did the
strict
same
class
thing almost
system.
for farming
Yeah.
and for other things. I'm like, whoa, but you want to maintain those things. I see the purpose of the policy. However, there's a lot of problems attached to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a strict class system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
And
been tried throughout history many times.
if you know that farming isn't working out in your area, you're really gonna
Want to be a farmer,
mm-hmm.
exactly. And so it also talks about corruption in politics, how many emperors would give like huge tax breaks to their friends, and even some emperors would reward those in their cabinet, even
Mm-hmm.
though that's not what it was back then. But basically, people in their group with like if there was a traitor found and they confiscated their homes for the state,
Then it gets
they would award those to their friends.
mm-hmm.
Whereas in the past, they used to sell those and bring in revenue for the country, and this created all sorts of problems, including um, friends of the emperors having a vested interest in promoting conspiracies that other people were conspiring against them, because then they would confiscate their estates and potentially be awarded it as well.
A
So
little malicious.
exactly. So there was all sorts of issues like that, and this also once again just continued to drive the separation between the upper crust and the lower class of people who like did not feel as vested in the Roman Empire, as far as I could tell based off what I read.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of it. It reminds me a lot of H.G. Wells. No, you've read The Time Machine, haven't you?
I don't think so.
Uh, it's one that they make you read a lot in middle school and things.
Hmm.
I went back and read it a few years ago because you hardly remember anything from middle school.
Yeah.
And it's just about classes got so separated that literally they evolved into two different types of people. These
Yeah.
ones that Morlocks who lived underground, and and they were kind of tough and rugged, and these guys who lived on the surface, and this idyllic, it became like really small and delicate and fragile.
Uh-huh.
And then over time, the Morlocks are like, oh, and they would eat the people from above.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of a food source. Let them run wild, and then just take a few.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's so they're talking about as disparity increases between the rich and the poor, how that does things. I think there is some credence to that because you think of the really great leaders. Alexander the Great comes to mind because he conquered a whole bunch of stuff and was able to keep it all
Uh-huh.
during his rule. But one of the things he did, I think, that really congealed his army into like a solid unit was he would take his meals with his men.
Yeah.
He'd be eating what they're eating alongside him. And that does something for people.
100%.
A leader who will do that. And like we were saying, in Rome, it was more like that at one time.
It was the first
And
among
then,
equals, is how they referred to the emperor.
Right. But over time, disparity crept in. I don't know if I would say that's the only thing, because
No, I think there was a number of things.
right.
Well, the things I read even went down to the climate. They talked about how in the golden years of Rome there was kind of a warm period, And then there was, what do they call it? They call it like a micro. It was a micro something ice age, where the temperature decreased, which would have greatly affected their crops and all sorts of other things like that. And people were saying that would have led to famine, which would have led to unrest, and which would have led to all this, that, and the other. So
Right.
there's
But,
a lot of
but you can
prevailing
overcome
theories.
that.
100%.
Mhm.
Well, but and see, that's the thing, is a lot of empires can survive during times of, I don't want to say prosperity, but kind of peace, even with corrupt systems and poor social fabrics and all that sort of stuff. It's when the large catastrophic events come that they are not nimble and, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not nimble
Adaptable.
and adaptable enough to be able to adapt to such things. They don't come together and say, like, as a society, like those on the west are running out of crops, let's come together and take care of them, and then later on they'll take care of us, so on and so on. It's more like those in the west are running out of crops, not much we can do for them, good luck. And then the problem is, they don't realize is when the west falls, so does everybody else. Like they're the ones guarding the borders, they're the ones doing yada yada yada,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so on, and it just has this domino effect of sorts. So the not only that, but also, so there's a whole bunch of causes put forward. One also is the Roman Empire had a huge number of trade routes available through the sea and just through a bunch of different places because they had access to a huge number of area. However, this also made it very possible for diseases to travel. And so they were hit with a bunch of plagues. Even one statistic that I read said that the average woman would need to have 6 children in order to maintain the population of Rome at that time.
Yeah. And that's really intriguing as our population is falling off.
Ours is too. Ours is, yes.
And it does seem a little crazy. I think some people who say, "Oh no, don't have as many children because overpopulation of the world." But I don't think that's a problem right now. I think
No, I don't
that,
think so.
especially as the generation of boomers, one of the biggest generations that we've had, are all dying.
Uh-huh.
They're reaching the end of their lifetimes, and so
Dying or retiring.
right,
Many of
and
them are still around. They're just retired. They're leaving the fields that they've worked in their entire life.
which leaves a whole bunch of empty places that are not being filled.
Yeah.
I think some of their jobs are less desirable than some
Yeah.
than what a lot of people from our generations are wanting to do.
We come from a very educated generation.
Well,
in the sense that
in a way,
college
yeah.
educated, yeah. And many college educated people are not going to be satisfied with doing much of the labor that is out there, which is funny because it's almost in a way created its own form of voluntary class society where, like, people, and this isn't necessarily true. I feel like many of the people that are in the jobs that would be considered a lower class don't consider their jobs lower class. I think they like their jobs and they are fulfilled by them. But kind of some of the upper crust jobs,
looks down.
I think, looks a little bit down on the other jobs that are a little bit more.
But the funny thing is, these quote unquote lower class jobs are in super high demand by those sort of people.
Absolutely.
They're like, oh, I need this person to do this,
and
they're not going to be there.
That's exactly it. And it's like, but so at some point, those other jobs are going to be in high demand, and they'll be making more money than the people in the upper crust jobs. But I don't think that will actually change their view of these other, supposed, lower class jobs, which is interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Williams. Well, we've talked about this for a while. I don't think we're going to close up just yet. I do want to ask you what you feel like would be the number one cause. I think there's a bunch of things that play a role, so I don't think you can say that these are the only causes. But in Williams's opinion, what do you think would be the number one cause of the fall of Rome?
That is difficult for a few reasons for me. One is I've been reading this book that's been talking about collapse in very general terms, and it ran through all these potential reasons for collapse, and then basically disregarded them all considered as it's this thing like I talked about earlier. As complexity increases in a society, so do returns from that complexity. But at a certain point, the returns from complexity
Absolutely.
fall off. And I think there's some credence to that, but I don't. I think that, in my personal opinion, and perhaps most of my reason for thinking this way is a bit more anecdotal, evidence wise. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with family.
Oh yeah.
And I think
we haven't even touched that one. Go ahead.
In my personal opinion, and perhaps this, I have some more religious reasons for thinking this way, because I've seen other forms of collapse outside of the Roman one.
Yeah.
And from the little bit I know about this aspect of Roman society during the fall, all I know is that just families didn't seem to be that great. And so I don't know a ton. I don't know if a lot of people have researched it as much.
Yeah.
But I know that in other cases, like in biblical cases, and even to our the book that we hold true to, that we have in our religion that's a little unique, the Book of Mormon. We use both that and the Bible. Between those two books, it talks about collapse a fair bit, and a lot of it is just the disintegration of familial ties.
It's true. Well, familial ties are very important in a huge number of situations, up to and including like the dissemination of information, like having fathers and mothers who teach their children, this is right, this is wrong, this is how you do things, like this is how you be successful in life, and so on and so on and so on. Once you have that breakdown of the family unit, you have a large number of people who probably don't fully understand how their society works, because they don't have those mentor type people around them. And that's not all of those people, but a large number of them will not have as good a mentors who are invested in their life and in taking care of them.
And it is essential that parental figures exist in a person's life. Does that mean someone without parents or whatever can't be successful? No, not at all. In fact, some very successful people, despite this,
despite having poor family situations,
right, come out.
However,
great individuals.
It's about the rules and exceptions, because if you live in a society that has families at the base of the society, and one person has a tragedy, whether it be the parents die or they leave or whatever happens, there will be one kid, perhaps a few kids, that will be lacking familial support. There will be families all around them that will oftentimes step in and provide that then support. But the problem is if you have tons of families or tons of individuals and only a few families, then that is too much work for those families to take on. So it needs to be the exception and not the rule.
That's true. And they'll often talk about figures who kind of took them in.
Absolutely.
I think of people who are fairly close to me that I know had issues with their own families. And they talk about other families around them or in people in their lives who weren't family,
but
per se, but but they had their own family and they kind of just incorporated them into that, and the huge impact that it made in their lives and how it led them to the idea of doing other good things in their lives, because of the generosity and things that they were being shown. Completely changed their paradigms. And didn't want to become better people, worth saving almost. You know? Which I think is an intriguing and important thing. So I like what you said about that. And so, like I said, it may not relate to the sort of the Roman decline as much, or perhaps it does in a very deep way that we just hasn't been as explored, or maybe it has been and I'm just not aware of it. But I do think that decline of the smallest unit of society
leads to the decline of the larger units,
right? Because the weakest link in the chain doesn't matter where it is in the chain. The whole chain.
And that's kind of a foundational link. So I completely agree with you. I really didn't read anything about that, but I have heard quite a bit.
Like I say, a lot of it's anecdotal evidence. A lot of it tying to my religious tendencies.
Yeah, well, and I believe that. I think I would tend to agree with you. They didn't.
I think it
Nobody
is
put that
proved
forward.
in general.
I think
but,
that a lot of times though is like a root, and so a lot of times it can be
and you're
really
not going to
easy
see a lot about
to
families in the
ignore
Roman
the roots.
Empire.
Yeah, 100%.
Archaeologically, or even probably written a lot of times.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. I think I would agree with you on that. So on that note, let's move on to our question.
The question from the audience.
The question from the audience. This question today is, if you were a cartoon character, which one would you be?
Do you have an answer for that? Or
I don't know if I do. Go ahead. I'm thinking.
I think, well, it really depends. Because, what aspect wants to be highlighted. I think it can make a decent Eeyore,
Oh. Well, if you're Eeyore, I'm definitely going to be Winnie the Pooh. Or Tigger. Am I Winnie the Pooh or Tigger?
It really just
depends.
Like
it depends on my mood. Yeah, I could be both.
Like, I'm not always Eeyore.
I could totally be like, oh,
I'm a little bit more fun,
I would like some pizza. And other
I
times I could be like, let's go play pickleball, Williams. Let's go do something.
Oh yes, I can read. He's going to school. School Rock, apparently. I don't know.
So you pick Eeyore. Cartoon character would I be? I think I'm going to go with Tigger. Just to stick with the Winnie the Pooh theme.
I like it.
I feel like that fits me pretty well. So,
the most wonderful thing about Starks is that he's the only one.
Yes, that's true. don't mind my 9 siblings.
Yeah.
And then my parents, and then my dad's brothers and sisters as well. Anyway, I'm the only one.
He's the only one.
I am the only one. So, I think that's about it for today, Williams. The only thing we need to consider for next time is, how are we going to make our empire last even longer and span even further?
I like it.
Williams, would you like to sign us out?
I would love to. Listen if you want, or not. We don't care.